Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
What's the most inappropriate thing you've seen teacher do or say? 1. When I was in AP Environmental Science in high school, my teacher sent us out with coring tools to collect soil samples. The samples he wanted were from the soil near the tennis courts. So off we went, for students carrying a bunch of science equipment out near the edge of campus when a PE teacher spotted us walking over. He yells at us and waves us over to him. He immediately accuses us of trying to steal from the school and flee the campus. After he gets our info, he sends us back to class. When we arrive back with no samples, we explain to our teacher what happened, and he rolls his eyes. A minute or two later, his phone rings and we hear his conversation with administration go something like this. Yeah, they're my students. No, they weren't trying to steal. I sent them out there. Well, fucking fire me then. Then he banged the phone to hang up on them, looked at his now shocked class, and said, "You can do stuff like that when you have tenure." It was epic. 2. 6th grade math class. The student who the school was aware of had severe home problems, didn't finish his workbook assignment, and fell asleep during it. I knew this kid forever and every other teacher accepted that he would sleep in class due to his home problems. Constantly being bounced between family members. Anyways. The teacher grabbed his desk and literally threw it across the room as he yelled about how useless it is trying to teach a lazy brat how to do anything. The desk bounced bizarrely, and the kid's stuff flew everywhere. I was shaking in fear cause the desk had sailed right past my corner. Hate you, Mr. Wheat. 3. A teacher offered to teach a student how to put on a condom. It was just creepy the way he said it. He played it off like a joke, but the student was freaked out by it. Worst overall was my high school principal. There was an incident where a bloody condom was found in the school bathrooms. Her bright idea was to get all of the girls in the school into a classroom and check their panties for blood. A couple female teachers helped. No charges were filed that I know of. But it was on the news. Edit, for anyone curious, the school was Jordao College. It's a South African small private school. The incident will probably come up if you Google it. From what I know, the same principal still works there. The first-year English teacher threw one of those cheap pink erasers at a kid who fell asleep in class, bounced it off his desk. The same situation repeats a week later. But when she goes over to his desk to check on him because he didn't react to the eraser, he scares the hell out of her with white contacts. She laughed about it once she relaxed again and told him that she wouldn't write him up as long as he took them out. Edit, successful conclusion, he stopped sleeping in class and she never threw an eraser at anyone else. 5. Accused me of telling kids that were bullying me that I was planning to bring my gang to the school to get even with them. This never happened. The kids that were bullying me concocted that lie so they could have a pretextual reason ready in case I told on them for the bullying. She brought me to the principal's office, where she told the resources officer about the gang lie, and the police officer yelled at me about how seriously he takes gang violence. That wasn't enough, so she then brought me to see the principal. The principal asks me what kind of grades I get. I tell him as in BS. The principal has a puzzled look on his face and asks why a good kid would talk about bringing a gang to school. Teacher then yells, "I am sick and tired of people thinking Thawad Throwaway is a good kid because he gets good grades." That moment will never leave my memory. Mrs. Wood, if you ever read this, you better hope you and I never cross paths in this lifetime. 6. I was a junior in high school, and my English teacher was pregnant. My mother was a heavy smoker. In the car, in the house, would light a new cigarette with her current one. She never had a cigarette. One day the teacher walked over to my desk in the middle of class and loudly went on a rant about how I needed to stop smoking before coming to class, how I reeked of smoke, and it bothered her. If she would have talked to me privately, that's one thing, but in front of the whole class, it embarrassed me. I told her I didn't smoke, it was my mom, But she didn't care and continued on about how smoking is bad, and the smell makes her nauseous. From that day on I kept Febreze in my car and in my locker. I take a shower but leave the house with my hair still wet so that it wouldn't dry and smell like smoke. 7. Back in middle school I was in English class looking down working on my work. I had long hair at the time because I was growing it out to donate. As a male in a conservative state with long hair, the teachers didn't like it. It was beginning to be a trend at the time to have long hair, so there were a few other boys that also had hair. The principal came into the room to announce something, can't recall what exactly it was, but when I looked up my hair fell in front of my face. After he was done announcing whatever it was, he pulled me out of the room and told me that it was against the dress code. He brought me into his office and proceeded to tell me the other boys that he ran into already got all the bobby pins and that he doesn't have any more. So, he then proceeded to duct tape my hair out of my face and sent me back to class. All the kids were mind blown. I went for the next couple of hours, each teacher I had made fun of before I just ripped them out. I went home with the pieces of duct tape matted with hair and told my grandma who I lived with and then called my mom. She blew it up. Called the school and threatened to sue with proof that she'd won since a similar case happened in New York. The next day the principal called an emergency school-wide meeting to publicly apologize. He then quit that year. One other instance is in high school I was doing lunch tutoring because I was failing math. It was me, a friend, and the adult tutor in the library at lunch. No one else was in there and we were just talking. Not loud. Normal speaking. Next thing you know, the old-ass librarian comes running down the hall and smacks me in the back of the head hard enough to make my head almost hit the table. I stood up, shouted, "What the fuck are you doing?" She started saying that it's a library and that we aren't supposed to be talking. I walked out and called my mom again and she called the school. Next day I got pulled into the library and the librarian apologized and was crying saying she had had a sad day. I told her no matter how bad of a day doesn't justify attacking someone and went back to class. 8. Third grade teacher. It was the mid-1980s or so. Obese, unit of a woman. Had a black kid in the class that was a textbook smartass. Always giving the teacher a lip over the smallest things. He comes in one day chewing on a piece of paper for some reason. The teacher, in a bad mood, comments he must be a wasp or something since he's chewing on paper. He shoots back a smartass comment about her weight in response. She walks over and slaps him and then calls him the N-word. Her punishment was administrative leave for the day. She came back the following day like nothing ever happened. 9. Math was right after lunch in my junior year of high school. We were a smallish school, the graduating class had less than 130 people. I came in early from lunch one day to find the door to my math class unlocked, but the lights were off. As I entered, I found my math teacher, a sweet and humble woman of 20+ years experience teaching math, with her head bowed a little with a bottle of Jack Daniels in hand, pouring some into her coffee cup. I entered silently and made my way to my desk as she looked up, startled. "What did you see here today, Ermengarde?" I saw my grade bumping a letter up, "Mrs. Math Teacher." She smiled coyly and replied, "Odd. That's what I saw, too." We never spoke of that event to each other again. And that's how I got a B+ in pre-calc. 10. In high school, I had huge breasts. Despite trying to hide them in sports bras, wraps, etc., they were always the main characters. I started wearing hoodies to class and every day, my science teacher would make me remove them and I didn't understand why. Long story short, I confronted him about it. He said some choice things about my breasts before giving one a squeeze and I ran out of the classroom. I reported him to school officials and the police. My dad tried to fight him. The school district gave him the option to retire. No criminal charges came from the incident. I was 15 at the time. 11. When I was a first-year student, in my second period science class, we had an older Asian man as a teacher. He didn't speak English all too well and he had almost no control over the class. Girls would do their makeup, the dudes would play loud music on their speaker, and I would make out with this one chick in my class daily for like 20 minutes straight. As I and this girl would be swapping spit, instead of telling us to stop or cut it out, he would stand next to us and just watch. Sometimes he would say things like, "Hoo-ha, that looks so good." And "Oh, you like that, don't you?" As a 14-year-old, I was so caught up in having my tongue in her mouth that it never occurred to me how weird that was until a few weeks ago. 12. My first grade teacher was a literal ogre. She would smack us in the back of the head for insignificant transgressions. Would not let anyone use the restroom outside of recess and would be so mean about it multiple kids in my class ended up wetting themselves instead of speaking up. She called us wonderful things like a bunch of stupid little dipshits and idiots and other wonderful things like that. There were other things that happened. My mom did not believe my complaints because they were so outlandish, but one day after she dropped me off she waited around and sneaked up to the classroom window and eavesdropped. She was appalled at how the woman was talking to the class and went back to the car and grabbed the cassette recorder she used to record lectures at college and recorded about 10 minutes of her teaching and immediately took it to the principal's office. After Christmas break we had a new teacher. 13. We had a real ass of a teacher in high school, and there was this kid from the poor side of town who looked like he never bathed or ate for that matter. Clothes filthy. This poor kid had to go to work after school and got off like 7 a.m. then come straight to school at 8. Often, he would fall asleep at his desk, exhausted. One morning, this ass of a teacher kept catching him nodding off and would scream at him in his ear to startle him. He'd threaten this kid with staying 3 hours after school, something this kid couldn't do, so the poor guy would try desperately to sit up and stay awake. Finally, he gave in and fell asleep. The teacher went over to the student's desk and shoved a pencil up the kid's nose. Then he slammed his book against the desk, startling the kid awake, who then accidentally rubbed his face, shoving the pencil into his nose. He yelled and grabbed the pencil out and mad, threw it across the room. The teacher just laughed and laughed because the kid's nose was bleeding and running down his shirt. The kid asked for a Kleenex, and the teacher refused, so the kid got up and walked out. We didn't see him for about 2 weeks after that. 14. When I was in ISS, in school suspension, I saw a teacher hit a student. At my school, the ISS room was regulated to a trailer outside. The teacher we had that day was a substitute and female. The student she hit was also a female and she deserves it TPH. She was well known in school for being a problem child and always cussing out teachers and talking in ways she knows she can get away with, because she's at school. Well, she was late to his and the teacher confronted her about it, so the student went off yelling, cussing, name-calling, threatening, etc. The substitute finally got to listen when she told her to go to the principal's, but on her way out she said something, I don't remember, and the teacher leaped out from behind the desk and ran at her and smacked her hard. It was going to hit the back of the head, but the student turned around hearing the steps of prophecy and enlightenment heading her way, so she turned around and whacked to the face it went. It was beautiful. The teacher froze after she hit her with the realization of what she did, but with the expression of IDGAF, "You're snobby brat, you deserve that." The student, who was forcefully knocked to the ground, looked up in shock. Once the realization of her getting hit by a teacher broke, she started running her mouth again, but this time about suing and all that. The substitute dragged her out with fury by her arm, and that's the last I had seen of both of them. Next thing was vice principal came in and was our supervision for the rest of the day. 15. In the 3rd grade, I had this really heinous woman for a teacher. Mrs. Riley. Everyone hated her and was scared to get her as a teacher. Over Christmas break, my mom and I were making candied apples and I burned very badly on my right hand. I had a big bandage on it when I went back to school. All day, she acted irritated at me for having the bandage on and not being able to write. After lunch, we were supposed to be practicing our cursive. She told me to take it off. I can put it back on after the lesson. I told her no. She argued till she finally sent me to the office in tears. They were flabbergasted, and told me I did the right thing, called my mom and she came to pick me up since it was almost time to go home anyway. The next day I went back, and she apologized in a very annoyed tone, I think because the principal made her. 16. When I was in grade 10 I had this math teacher who was married but very flirty. He was really laid back and funny so most of the students liked him. One time after class everybody had left and while I was packing up he asked me if I had seen a ring around. When I told him I hadn't he informed me that he must have lost it around the school. It was his wedding band. We proceeded to walk around the school for probably an hour chatting and looking for this ring and then he reached for his back pocket and gave me a CD he said he burned for me. I never felt it was appropriate until I was older looking back on this memory. It was like he had me on a little date, and I didn't even know it. 17. Because of a weird scheduling issue, I was a high academic college-bound geek in a science class with 20 kids who were probably destined to drop out and or land in prison eventually. Some of them did, for both. The teacher was doing everything he could to engage them, all but spoon-feeding them to pass the class, but when they don't give a rat's ass there's only so much you can do. After telling a particular group to be quiet 3 to 4 times in one class period, he gave us a pop quiz, 20 questions fill in the blank, list of 20 words on the board to choose from. Easy if you'd paid any attention that week. We handed them in as we left the room. I happened to be last, and he asked me to hang back a moment. He'd grade mine on the spot. And then said it's just a shame you're stuck in here. 18. My wife, 55, had a teacher in elementary or middle school, can't remember which, who was nuts. She'd scream at the class. Say they were dumb as dogs and that they were driving her to drink. This was like 45 years ago, so when kids said what she was doing, no one believed them. Or they were told they probably deserved it. Finally, a parent put a tape recorder in their kid's bag and had them turn it on when she went on a rant. Fun times. Teachers were later institutionalized. 19. In high school we had a sub for our improv class who was clearly more used to STEM-related courses. She kept yelling and screaming at us for being too rowdy, aka she wasn't directing class at all, so we started splitting into groups to do improv exercises, and at the end of the class she sat us all down and told us we were the perfect example of failed students who would never aspire to anything. Luckily, because of how she treated us during the rest of class, one of the kids secretly recorded her rant and we told the actual teacher the next class, who promised she would never sub for us again. Same year, same sub, science class, she puts her notes for us to copy on the projector for a measly minute at most, and when she took it down and a couple kids got up to walk up to the paper to finish copying, something that was allowed by the regular teacher so long as we weren't disruptive, and we weren't, she began yelling at us to sit down and said we were only allowed to stand up to copy notes, which I'm pretty sure was a study guide for an upcoming test. If not, it was still something important we'd need to go back to, if we were able to physically hand her a copy of a form that basically says, this student has a disability so please accommodate, cue another tirade about failed students, yada. A couple of us were from the improv class together and knew she was like this. We tried to get up to go to the office to report her, and of course she asked where we were going, and we were honest that she was being literally abusive, and we were going to the principal. She decided the next best course of action was to physically put her hands on the girl in front to stop her from opening the door. An extremely popular girl at that who had already been through a lot that year, so all the boys got up and started screaming and a good dozen of us made a mass exodus down the hall telling every teacher we saw along the way who asked us what we were up to. The first group of us got to the office and got cued to talk to the principal, and by the time the class period ended nearly every student from that class was packed into the office and lobby. It was so important that the office staff were giving out passes to excuse us from our next class so we could write a statement. Last I heard, she's not allowed to teach in our district or any of the surrounding districts, and our reports were tacked onto her professional file, so anyone who tries to hire her will see she has gross misconduct towards students filed against her and can call my district for the details. 20. My first semester professor in architecture told us that we shouldn't study architecture if we're poor. Whoever can't afford a MacBook has no chance whatsoever and should quit. She then proceeded to show various different work from the first task she gave us on the projector screen in the auditorium. She stopped at one of the slides and asked who did it. A girl coyly raised her hand. The professor asked her to stand up for everybody to see. We all clapped. She then started to tell us 270-plus students how bad the work was and went into excruciating detail berating what she submitted. She then asked her rhetorically why she even bothered trying to become an architect and she should simply quit. Ironically, she finished her master's degree before any of us did and got into a leading position at the firm she is working with early. While 70% quit before the end of the first semester. 21. My middle school band teacher would throw tantrums and take his frustrations out on everyone. The most memorable episode for me was when he threw a cymbal at the wall with the stand attached while yelling at us. I was terrified of him, which is honestly why I practiced a lot and was in first chair by 8th grade. Another fond memory I have is when he was standing on top of a chair during a concert rehearsal. In the middle of screaming at us, he lost his balance and fell. He was probably in his early 60s at the time, so I was concerned at first. More so, I was scared that he would take it out on us, especially after a girl let out a laugh after it happened. I recall he actually calmed down a bit after he fell, but not after calling out to the girl to laugh. This was in 07-08, not even that long ago. 22. Okay, I have one. Senior year, I had a history teacher that would spend the first half of every class scrolling through the front page of the Fox News website. He was also a smoker and smelled terrible, and I think he was an alcoholic as well because he slurred his speech pretty badly. One day he called me in after class because he thought I had cheated on a test I had, and as he was questioning me about why I was looking at my phone so much during the test, he reached into his mouth and pulled out a black tooth. Then he opened his desk and pulled out a sandwich bag with 2 or 3 other black teeth and added that one to the stash. He looked at me and slurred out, "Shit, there goes another one," and let me leave without any further questioning. This was at one of the most expensive college prep schools in the Southeast. Last I heard, they finally fired him. 23. I'm 35 now and I'll never forget it. Not much else I remember from that far back would have been 5th grade. There was a kid in class that was a bit portly, and always seemed dirty. I imagine many of you had the dirty kid in class. Looking back now, the family was almost certainly struggling. Call him Bill. Christmas gifts were important for this particular teacher. She effectively had kids slowly parade up front and present them with gifts, in front of the entire class. Well, this kid goes up, and brings her the gift his mother had sent, which was some decorative plate with an angel on it. But poor Bill's a kid in 5th grade, and a bit clumsy, and as he hands it to her he breaks the plate. And this absolute which just stresses him down, in front of the entire class, about how he'd broken the lovely gift his mother had sent. It just went on and he just stands there, downcast, I'm sure completely at a loss at what to do, tears welling. Until she finally relents, sends him back to his seat and summons some other kid up to pay tribute. I still think about him every so often, almost a secondary trauma on his behalf. And I wonder what that must have been for him, what a formative moment it must have been as a kid that age. I know how I felt about teachers, they were on a pedestal somewhere adjacent and above your own parents. So, like I tell my daughter, mistakes happen. And Bill, man, if you're out there, I hope you're crushing it. 24. Had a male English teacher in high school. A girl was borderline failing in the class. I think she had some level of undiagnosed dyslexia because I had tutored her in algebra a year earlier. She was nearly in tears trying to collect herself with another poor test score. The teacher walked by her desk and casually said, "Don't worry about it. You're pretty enough that these scores won't matter." He was reported and nothing came of it because there weren't enough witnesses that agreed to hear it. 3 students said they heard it. 3 students sitting next to her said they didn't. 1 student was adamant that it didn't happen. I was in the class but on the opposite side of the room and didn't hear it. But I definitely believe he did. He was let go a few years later for retaliating against another teacher by failing her son. The other teacher had put in a complaint about how he once referred to the way students dressed as sexy or slutty in small talk in the lounge. I don't think he ever attempted anything with a student. He didn't have that level of confidence, but he was definitely not the most comforting presence. Just a creepy, resentful liberal arts guy who fell back on teaching high school. He'd almost exclusively pick the pretty girls to stand in front of the class to read while he sat at their desks and watched. Weird man. I'm surprised he lasted the 4 to 5 years he was there. 25. I'm a high school teacher. I heard this second-hand from another teacher I'm close with. There was this man who was incredibly unprofessional during COVID. Would fall asleep during staff meetings, one time started snoring so loud it interrupted the entire meeting. But that's not why he got fired. His teacher was giving a lecture on social justice and why stereotypes are bad. That's when this man, a person of color, decided to chime in and say that sometimes stereotypes are correct, like black men have large penises and Hispanic women are extraordinarily fertile. That might not be the worst though. Same year a woman quit before she got fired, because despite being an environmental science teacher, she would go on rants about how global warming was a hoax and Black Lives Matter was a terrorist organization. She decided that she needed to show her kids videos made by alt-right figureheads. I teach at a primarily black/Latino inner-city school. 26. I didn't specifically see it, but I was across the hall. I worked as a TA in a middle school many years ago. There was a problem with the student we had in our grade. They would throw fireworks, stink bombs, they even set fire to a trash can once. Basically, every single class period they were speedrunning getting kicked out. Absolutely zero help from home. We all hated this kid. Pitied him as well, of course. We knew that single mom didn't have time for him or his 2 brothers. My oldest brother was in juvie already. Anyhow, long story short, this kid is in science class and jumps onto the table kicking over beakers and other science equipment while yelling the N-word over and over. Calling the teacher, it, other students, even the black ones. The kid was black and claimed he was allowed because it was their word. The teacher had enough, grabbed the kid off the table, and proceeded to duct tape him to the chair. Like he couldn't move at all. The teacher was given the option of early retirement after administrative leave. Obviously, they handled it wrong. Still though, the student was rather tranquil about it. 27. The new assistant principal looked under the stall in the bathroom while my friend was using it. My history teacher showed the entire class images of dead bodies. Without any warning. Had a math teacher scream at 2 boys in my class in the hallway. I have never ever seen a teacher scream that loud or get that upset. I don't think I've ever heard anyone scream that loud actually. I genuinely think the whole school could have heard it. It was because they tried to cheat on a math test. My uncle had her as a teacher before me, and he said she would randomly be in a really bad mood because she always had issues with her boyfriend or Smith lol. There was another time my whole class was doing something in the hallway. I don't remember what. Then the door to one of the special education classrooms opened, and one of the teachers was grabbing onto a special needs kid's arm really tightly and dragged her out of the classroom before throwing her onto the floor. The teacher just stared at her and yelled while the girl cried in front of my whole class. I was pretty young, so I wasn't sure if that was an okay thing for that teacher to do, and I didn't like confrontation, but now that I know I really wish I had reported it. During marching band season, we practiced some of our marching music in class, as it was a newer song, and we were the top band at school, so it was up to us to be the best players on the field. In the middle of the song our band director randomly cut us off, and then proceeded to verbally berate us for like 15 minutes. She called us arrogant, told us we weren't working hard enough, and said we had no enthusiasm. Then she walked off the stage and told us to run the class ourselves. We were getting ready for a concert as well, so we practiced on the stage. Also had a friend who went to the guidance counselor for help. The counselor handed my friend a paper, and if she signed it, it would mean she promised not to kill herself. God, I hate my school. 28. In the 5th grade, I was October 11th, and my teacher knew I have gluten intolerance, and we had a pizza party one day, then the next day had donuts, and the day after we had a waffle party. I was hanging out in the corner with some friends, and I started crying because I couldn't eat anything, and she didn't give any warning so I could bring my own option. Well, she found out I was crying, pulled me out of the class and basically lectured me and ended it with, "The world isn't gluten-free and you need to get over it." Again, 3 days in a row, a 10-11-year-old who couldn't partake in class parties and enjoy what everyone else got, and somehow it was my fault. 29. In junior high school in New York, early 1970s, between classes I saw one of my teachers lift one of the school bullies by the neck, completely off the ground, and pinned him against the wall of lockers. Not sure what specifically prompted it, but knowing the bully's reputation and history, well. The teacher was about 6 feet 5 inches, but an ordinary-looking middle-aged man, like a very tall accountant or grocery clerk, didn't look at all like a tough man. I was wrong. Nowadays the teacher would be fired or fired at by the bully and his friends. In high school my algebra teacher was in his last year before retirement and drank cough syrup throughout the day. This was back when prescription cough syrup had codeine, and non-prescription cough syrup and stomach medicine could have some potent stuff like belladonna. Or it might have been alcohol. After graduation he joined us in the parking lot to drink beer. He was wearing cut-off jeans and a t-shirt, pretty jolly, not the grumpy man he'd been all school year. I'm not sure either incident was inappropriate. More like inspiring. 30. High school art class. We had a teacher who had just moved to our town. One of the first few lessons I had with her, she started talking to the class about how there must be something in the water because so many of the girls here were slim with big boobs. She then got one of the girls to stand in the middle of the room, the desks were in a horseshoe around the edges, and do a slow spin so that we could all see what she was talking about. She wasn't wrong, a lot of the girls were exactly how she described. But it was super inappropriate of her to say it and then get a girl up to demonstrate. 31. When I was in kindergarten or year 1, my teacher, every Monday morning, would ask if any of us had loose teeth. If we did, we put our hands up and then told to stand in a single file line, and she would ask which one, then give it a wiggle, then if it were loose enough, she would rip them out. Didn't wash her hands between kids either. This was back in the 90s. I didn't think much of it at the time, but as I got older. She also told my mom to tie my left hand behind my back and teach me to write with my right hand. My mom told her to go. And when my younger sister had her a year later, she had fallen over and scraped her knee. Having it under the desk hurt, so she had that leg, like her foot on the chair with her knee up, and this teacher came along, flicked the sore and then told her to sit properly. She hit kids too. Karma got her though. She was obviously older, and one time we went to some park for an excursion and for some reason, she thought it was a clever idea to slide down a metal slide. She broke her tailbone. 32. I used to go to a religious private school in Detroit, and there were 2 experiences that came to mind, each from a different teacher. The first was before my time. My sister was present when this happened. The 8th grade teacher once broke a yardstick slapping a kid's hand with it because the kid wasn't paying attention in class. After this, he made the child stand in the corner, and pushed the child's face against the wall hard enough it made his forehead bleed. The teacher in question was also the pastor of the local church, and later became principal of the school. A few years later, when I was in 8th grade, same classroom, but different teacher, one day shortly before school let out, one of the students in my class fell asleep at his desk. When the bell didn't wake him up, the teacher got us all to stay quiet and sneak out of the classroom while he stayed asleep, leaving him alone in an empty class. Apparently he woke up an hour later, confused, and terrified. The teacher treated it as a huge joke, as did we, but we were children, and she was a grown adult. 33. Department head of small humanities program at smallish Catholic college really enjoyed picking fights with the administration. I was occasionally a weapon in these fights and got away with a lot as a result, but that's a whole other story/ball of things I'm untangling a few years later. I think this man was probably just bored, but he had questionable judgment and even less boundaries, so, fall semester the year I have the required class he teaches, man decides he wants to challenge the school's theology requirement. Now, the requirement for decades had been that a student has to take 3 theology classes to graduate, regardless of major, and 2 of those classes just had to be in certain categories, but the third one was that one. The one that had been developed by a revered, and by this point I'm pretty sure dead for years, priest who'd been on faculty for long enough to make it the core curriculum of a school that, other than this requirement, was not the lat Catholic, and my nominally agnostic ass had no existential problems with the place. Department head, for whatever reason, decides he wants to try to get rid of that as a requirement. Q, apparently, at least 2 all-faculty meetings because this man sent some reply-all emails he should not have sent. How does this become inappropriate, you ask? Our man here was immensely proud of himself for causing this many problems and gave his students regular updates on the situation. The department as a whole tended to be a little too open about drama, but usually it was just the fact that all the professors hated each other, not ambitious crazy. I'm not sure what professional boundaries got crossed there, but I feel like there are several. Needless to say, this scheme did not work out, but I fully expect he's either still trying or has found some other ridiculous battle that his current students know far too much about. 34. We had a kid in our class named Tyler who came from a pretty rough childhood. He would constantly speak out in class, argue with the teacher, and just wasn't all that well behaved. Anyways, when I was in the 5th grade, our French teacher went on birth-related leave, and we got this hard-as substitute teacher named Mr. King. He and Tyler got into it quite a bit from what I remember, and one day, Tyler did something, and Mr. King just yelled out, "I'm tired of your shit," and dragged Tyler out of the classroom with his metal necklace that was popular around 2004. Needless to say, it was the talk of our classroom for the rest of the day, and from what I remember, Mr. King was either gone the next day or shortly thereafter. Eventually, our principal came to our class one day and let us know that Mr. King would no longer be teaching in our county. At the time, my 10-year-old brain couldn't comprehend how awful Mr. King was that day. I just assumed Tyler was a bad kid, and he was getting punished like he always did. I don't even think I connected the dots between him dragging Tyler by the necklace and our principal telling us that he wasn't going to be teaching in our county until a few days later. 35. This actually happened a couple of months ago. So, I live in Serbia, and it basically has no black people, maybe in Belgrade, but where I live in South exceedingly rare to see any. We have a geography professor that is very weird. She is old, probably around 70. And one day we were learning about human diversity and stuff, and once we got to a picture of a black child she literally said in Serbian, "Look how cute it is, you could keep it as a pet." It may sound fake, but she literally has the nickname vodka, alcoholic drink, because she seems to be drunk every time she comes to class because of the way she acts. This has been reported to other professors, but no act has been taken since she is close to retirement. The school knows about these kind of actions but never takes any steps in making it stop. This wasn't the first or last inappropriate thing she has done. To me it's clear there is some kind of a mental problem, but as far as I know she has no family and no one to help her, but it's not an excuse for the school to let this keep happening. She has been working in all kinds of schools for over 30 plus years. 36. In middle school I was in a drama club, and over the whole course we practiced doing this play. Memorized our lines, rehearsed, all that stuff. There was going to be a performance in front of the school at the end of the semester. Well, as we got close to the live performance, the teacher got furious at one kid because he forgot his lines, canceled the play, and told us it's all his fault. After school, while getting on the buses, me and some other boys beat him up. He didn't come back for a while. Well, when I got older I realized there was never going to be a play. When they have these things, there's always a form sent home to the parents, administrative work for reserving the space, scheduling a school function, it's talked about on morning announcements, it's on the events calendar, and that's all stuff done by school staff. None of that was happening. This was just the format of her class: practice the play, cancel it, blame one of the kids. They had this class every year, but there was never a play. Didn't make that connection as a kid, but now I understand it. What horrible. 37. One of my university professors gave me back my work saying it was utterly wrong and that I must have been lucky to finish my bachelor's because I understand nothing about mathematics. He then gave me a better version to compare. Turns out the proof was mostly done the same. In my presentation he openly insulted me multiple times. He never said, "This is wrong because of," but just said stuff like, "You have no idea what you're talking about," and asked ambiguous question no one in the room could answer because the context was missing. I failed that class and I had to redo my semester because it was my last class. The university said they couldn't do anything even though I showed them the documents and signed statements from classmates to back up my claims. 38. One kid in my health class in 11th grade was immature and obnoxious. Constantly disrupting class and doing it he knew would pass the teacher off. The teacher threw a desk at him like one of those ones with the chair attached. Hit him, split his head open. He went on administrative leave and was forced into retirement. I think the teacher was in his late 60s already and planning to retire, so NBD. Oddly enough, a few years later when I was in college I was home on summer break and accompanied a friend to a house party at that kid's house. That teacher was living with him. Playing beer pong with a bunch of 21-year-olds, lol. Apparently he was a full-blown alcoholic, his wife threw him out, and he needed a place to live. No idea how he ended up living with his arch nemesis. 39. This would have been 2006. I was doing rather poorly in academic stream math and was in a class time intended to help us prep for our finals. Basically, the entire class was, because despite the fact that the math teacher was working on a math degree, none of us could understand what he was teaching. At one point, one of the students asked him to go back over a concept he'd just covered, because she didn't understand. He said he didn't have time. She persisted, and he said something to the effect of, "No wonder everyone in the teacher's lounge says you can't keep your mouth shut." She started crying and left the classroom. One of her friends called him an AH and ran after her. He called down to the head office and had them both designated as leaving class without permission. Another student called him an AH and left. When I approached the principal about this, I was told he had tenure, and had already apologized. 40. I had a physical science teacher in high school tell a story about how he used to masturbate like a mad dog after his divorce when he thought the entire class was ignoring him completely. That man hated me because I have a disability and missed a lot of classes but still scored really well when I was there, so that annoyed him. It didn't help that not long into his story, I really started paying attention and almost died laughing in the class, shut the whole room up. Teacher was absolutely mortified that out of everyone there, I was the one that caught it, and I commenced calling him Madden not only for the rest of my time in high school, but every time I ever ran into him outside of school afterwards. Oh, I also told the story to everyone I knew that had his class for the next few years, so he basically didn't live it down for easily half a decade. It was pretty much high in my top 10 greatest moments in high school, funniest part of the entire 4 years. 41. The class had to draft a paper in MSB's class on what they wanted for their future occupation and why. I wrote that I wanted to be a machinist and gave the reasons it was a good profession. Half the class had presented their future occupations, the usual doctor, lawyer, and one brown-nosed girl presented teacher to the joy of Ms. B. Upon my presentation, Ms. B sneered and pointed out that machinists were typically uneducated, dirty, and smelled bad. I was shocked as she continued in a cruel manner that it really wasn't even an occupation and it wasn't really any different than working at McDonald's, but at least McDonald's employees wore clean clothes. That evening my dad asked how my presentation went that day, since he was a machinist and had helped me with the presentation. I told him what Ms. B said and he listened quietly and didn't say anything. The next day a friend said he'd seen my dad in the principal's office. My dad never spoke of what happened, but the teacher never looked at me again and I finished the year with an A. 42. I guess it's between the third grade teacher, who usually only directed her anger at me, telling us we were all stupid. Now I'm realizing I no longer remember the context for that at all, and the fifth grade Jewish studies substitute who, when I had my head down on the desk, slammed both hands down on the desk very suddenly. IDK if it's a special sensory issue for some autistic people or if it's that bad for everyone and nobody bothered to complain about him, but he probably could have slapped full force, and it would have been just as jarring and uncomfortable. The third grade teacher apparently had a reputation of making even older students cry, but she must have worked through her because she was nicer when she instructed my brother. I'd seen her on the street over the years and she always greeted me in a very friendly way, and I've always wondered why she thought she could do that without an apology of any kind. The rabbi is apparently going through major surgery and I'm disappointed because I can't fantasize about telling him off if I'd be kicking a sick old man when he's down. That's probably what he would do if he thought the sick old man was being disrespectful in class, and it would be funny. 43. I had a teacher drag me out of class by my hair and pin me up against the door using his forearm against my neck for talking back and said to listen to him the first time he says something. It was in 5th grade, and we were all cleaning out our desks. The teacher asked me something and I couldn't hear, so I said, "Huh?" He asked something again and I said, "What was that?" still unable to hear as the room was pretty noisy with everyone cleaning, and he stormed over and dragged me out of class. I think he had some kind of like inner meltdown or Vietnam flashback. Bonus story to lighten the mood. In 9th grade we were in sex ed, learning about sperm. The teacher was comparing it to rice, and asked in what way sperm and rice were similar. Without missing a beat my friend Alana shouts out, "You eat it," and to this day it is one of the funniest things I've seen. 44. In the 9th grade my dad died the week after winter break, which was right before finals for the fall semester, oddly enough. The school gave me like a week and a half off and delayed my finals unless a teacher wanted to waive the final. One teacher was livid that I was going to miss his final the Monday after my dad's Saturday funeral. Come end of the spring semester he was ranting in class about nobody missing his final. Then this man looked me dead in my eye and said something like, "You are not kissing my final, I don't care who dies." He immediately turned around. Had two of my friends not been right next to me to stop me, the desk I picked up was going straight for his head. I ran him the road a few years later and he died in his early 50s, so I got the last laugh. 45. I went to Rickards Middle in Oakland Park, FL, and my friend was groomed and sawed repeatedly by security that was dating his mother. The guy was an absolute POS, and his name was William Edelman, and I don't care posting that man's name for people to look up. He's also probably dead now, and good riddance. I won't post my friend's name and luckily the articles don't mention him, but he's married with kids now and seems to be thriving, at least outwardly. I truly wish the best for him and hope over the years he will be able to move past it all. One band teacher was fired for being arrested with drugs in his car while he was also driving a student somewhere. I'm not sure if he was a total creep or just happened to be helping a kid out and happened to have some weed on him. I never caught creep vibes from him at all. The next band teacher was a creep and was fired for making many inappropriate comments to the girls in his class. That guy gave off gross vibes like it was a stink aura surrounding him. This was 30 years ago. 46. Grade 10 science teacher warned us we had the opportunity to watch a live birth recording in our next class. told us we could opt out. Literally no one did because we were all brash teenagers. Video was terrifying as you can imagine. A girl actually fainted in the hallway. She fainted fairly often, but it somehow got worse when the baby was placed on mom's chest. It was our science teacher. Saw more of that woman than I'd yet to see of any other. She then proceeded to tell us in direct terms how long it took to heal, what afterbirth was like, how she and many other women develop a weak pelvic floor afterwards. She scared us, and I will say there was only one teen pregnancy in my year, but if I would love to go back in time to unsee her vagina tearing as the doctor pressed aggressively on her perineum. Apparently she had been showing this video for years and her kid was an adult with her own kid by the time I was in grade 10. 47. My English teacher was super close with students in inappropriate ways. Let me give examples. 2009, he started and began dating a student who graduated in 2008. So, he was never her teacher, but we were still friends with her. They came to our New Year's Eve party for like 15 minutes and she was drunk and showed us her fitness at that time. Super weird. He looked super uncomfortable the whole time but should have known not to be there. He married her around this time BTW. 2010, I was a student aide in his class. He used to sign passes for me to leave school and get him Taco John's. It was honestly a decent setup for me but probably inappropriate. 2011 or 12 I was out of high school, and he was arrested and fired. I heard the story secondhand, but it sounds like he traded nudes with a student, not one of his, but same school, on this anonymous app. As I understand, he didn't know she was a minor or anything. I don't think he went to jail. As far as I know, he's still married to the same girl but last I checked he has the cheating husband's shared Facebook account with his wife. 48. When your professor is your parent, but you know about as much as they do, if not more, you get asked questions in class. Not the usual way. They'll be in the middle of a sentence talking about a topic, then turn and look at you, ask something in a confirming tone, and only be right sometimes. Often I would correct them when they seemed to be asking, then they would turn back to the class and continue the lecture with the added information. I knew more than both of the IT professors combined, and I proved it regularly. The IT degree there was a joke. 49. We had a math teacher who doubled as a school bus driver, small school, and one day this kid named AJ was raising a ruckus. He was only about 7 or so. And the teacher/bus driver slammed on the brakes and jumped out of the driver's seat, ran back, grabbed poor AJ by the biceps and just lifted him up, just straight up in the air, and carried him back to the empty front seat and slammed him down. And hard. AJ was bawling. It was wild. A few weeks later the same teacher/driver was doing his route and there was this kid on the back of the bus and there was this big log that had washed across the road because of a rainstorm and the teacher/driver stomped the gas to ramp it, I guess, and when he hit the thing it shot that boy that was in the back seat up and he came down so damn hard it broke his back. That's the truth. That was back in the 90s. That teacher never got fired. 50. Back in my all-boys Catholic high school, my theology teacher Father Cochran would spend half of each class talking about drinking during his ski trips in Europe, and the other half of the class telling dirty jokes. He was the fun teacher who all the kids loved. He was arrested several years later for having sexually assaulted a kid who attended the school at the same time I did, and also for having sexually assaulted another kid who went to him for counseling to deal with the trauma of having been previously sexually assaulted at another Catholic school in 2nd grade. 51. My art teacher at a rural Midwestern middle school had two interesting things going on. He was color blind, not relevant to the story, just funny, he was a Vietnam vet. Every now and then, he'd just stop and tell us incredibly graphic Vietnam stories. He also kept a grenade in his desk. It had been hollowed out, but swore it was otherwise real. The story I most remember, and to my knowledge a story he'd tell every class the first time he showed them the grenade, was about how the concussion shockwave from explosions would liquefy people's bones if they were too close. and that he'd been sent out to help retrieve the bodies of people who had suffered this fate. He described in great detail that this was done with essentially a wide, flat shovel and that you did your absolute best not to pop them. We were 12 to 13 years old. 52. My teacher beat a girl with a yardstick in 7th grade for wetting herself due to stress and becoming nervous before giving a speech to the class. In other news, I made out more than once with the best-looking teacher in the school. Maybe in the county. But, please, before you comment, I'm interested in your thoughts about which of the above is most inappropriate. The first teacher ended up being reassigned to another school, and the girl never seemed too affected by the incident after that. After my incident, the teacher remained at my school, and I was the subject of constant ridicule, lost friends, couldn't get dates, and, while I can't prove it, other teachers seemed to make sure my grades suffered, or at least made my life at school a little more difficult. Now that I'm older, I regret that incident and am glad I was able to recover emotionally from it. Back then, I felt my incident was worse, but as time has passed, I see the first as more inappropriate on the part of the teacher. 53. We had an incubator in the class. But us kids couldn't really put the lid on right and we'd crack eggs. 2nd grade, teacher would regularly explode. We were terrified of her. One day shortly before the eggs were due to hatch, someone cracked an egg again. So, the most logical thing to do was hold up the still alive, bloodied chicken fetus in front of a terrified class of 7 and 8-year-olds. We were all screaming and crying as she shamed and guilted us for killing another chicken. I wish I could find her. It's 30 years later. She was easily 45 to 55 at the time and might be dead now, but I'd love to give her a piece of my mind. 54. 8th grade French teacher. She was from France and had a pretty strong accent. We had a lesson that lasted most of the period and we only had 7 minutes left. We were to work on the work from the lesson she just gave. One kid beside me puts his hand up and when called on said, 7 minutes isn't enough time to do anything, can we just go? And this 30 to 40-year-old woman said to a class of 13-year-olds, 7 minutes is enough time for me to the rest of your life hell. The whole class burst out laughing. French accent made it so much more menacing. 55. My high school teacher for current events was a total perv. My seat was at the front, and I'd wake up in class, I was sick my senior year and just passed out a lot, to him unabashedly staring down my shirt or leaning at an odd angle to see under the desk. He was really big on giving the students hugs at the end of class. The same teacher was throwing parties every weekend and invited all the popular juniors and seniors. My best friend lived down the street and it was not uncommon to see our classmates walking home in various states of intoxication and undress. Found out later that one of our other teachers was a co-host for all these parties. If I recall correctly, multiple teachers were fired or quit the following few years and I think one of them was arrested for knocking up a student. 56. I went to a Catholic high school, and a mandatory class was religion. Every class we had to say a prayer before, and my teacher, who was a religious brother, was observing his students before class. There was this one girl, leaning forward, letting her hair hang in her face just waiting for class. The teacher walked up to her, touched her hair himself. After touching her hair, he says to her in front of all the students, "Why do you hide yourself? You're so beautiful." She reported him right away, but no action was taken. 57. When I was in university, one of our classes required us to split the class in half for an exercise. The other half had to wait outside as he gave a briefing for the first half of the class. One student, a 6.3-foot bodybuilder type, asked the teacher if he had enough time to go to the bathroom while waiting outside. The teacher said he could go, it's fine. About 5 minutes pass and the second half of the class is asked to come inside for their brief. He came in about 2 minutes later and entered the room. The teacher furiously asked why he was late. He explained that with his permission was able to leave to go to the bathroom and had to walk to the next one because the closest one was occupied by cleaners. The teacher, still mad, kept arguing with him saying he had no respect for the class and should leave. The student, understandably perplexed, kept his ground that he wants to continue following the lecture and apologized for disrupting by entering too late even though he did not know how long it would take. The teacher must have had a dreadful day because he kept pressing him and baiting him into saying something wrong to prove his point. Eventually the teacher just flat out said, "Do you want me to headbutt you right now?" The student calmly said, "Well, let's take this outside then." The teacher said, "No, let's do it here." The student kept his ground and said no outside as he stood at the door waiting for him. But he was startled and could not keep a straight face because the student did not back down to his request. After a minute, the student said that he would be waiting outside and left. Me and many other students said duck this and left the class in honor. We reported him after with a bunch of us. Apparently he had a record, so it did not come as a surprise. He even asked the student later on in the week to not report him. It was too late, lol. 58. There was a teacher who was widely known, by students, not teachers, for sleeping with seniors. Another teacher who used to call this little Filipino kid cockroach, would throw desks across the classroom, screamed and swore at me when I was sent to fetch a senior from his class, grabbed a kid and held him over the edge of the second-story walkway, and shoved a photo of a dog dick in my friend's face. There was another teacher who would brag about how once he found a tortoise on the side of the road, so he took it home and made it into soup. We had a vegan girl in our class, had a history teacher who argued with a kid about the pronunciation of his own name. Don't remember the kid's name cause this was a sibling's class, not mine, but I know he wasn't white. Had a deputy principal talk about that same teacher the next year, but honestly it was totally warranted. She'd already been fired. She lasted 10 weeks. And then there was my science teacher. First day of year 7, I'm from Australia, so year 7 is the first year of high school, and he sits the class down and lectures us about how much he hates kids. He left for completely unrelated reasons late the next year. A few friends of mine accidentally stumbled across his Instagram, where they found an infamous post. He was leaning up against a fence, in a G-string, intentionally accentuating his ass. The caption was, "Cheeky Tuesday." I only saw the image once and for a split second, but I will never forget it. It was talked about all the time for the remainder of my time there. The image spread across the entire school like wildfire. Worst of all, he returned less than a month after we found the image. Nobody could look at him the same. We also had a deputy say in front of the entire school, "Stop playing with your balls or I will confiscate your balls." The entire school, teachers included, burst out laughing, and she stood there for a few seconds before realizing what she'd said and started laughing too. 59. The one science teacher in the school was married to the one language arts teacher in the school. It was a low-performing school district where teachers could get student loans forgiven that was worth more than the salary for many teachers. Anyway, the two of them would hang out in the English classroom after school, and 90% of the time, they'd both strip their shirts off and grade papers in their underwear. No attempts to cover up when students came in. That still pales in comparison to the second grade teacher who had an affair with a girl she coached on the 7th grade volleyball team. Of course, no criminal charges were filed. The superintendent was in his 40s and married to an 18-year-old girl who had just graduated from his previous school district. 60. I'm a preschool teacher and I knew of a coworker who, if another class had combined with hers, she would pretty much ignore the other kids and only focus on her class. For context, classes would combine towards the end of the day, so the teacher who had opened in the morning could go home. The teachers that remained were typically the closers. That's what this teacher was, and she hated it. One day, after combining, she purposefully did not change a toddler's dirty diaper because she was the infant teacher, and she didn't think she should be doing the toddler teacher's job. The poor toddler got a terrible diaper rash. She was bleeding, she would scream and cry and fight during every diaper change. It was awful. That teacher didn't last long after that. Junior year of high school. 61. Which teacher? The two science teachers that got caught sleeping together at school by a student, they were married, just not to each other? The female of the couple then showed her classes texts of her after-affair boyfriend talking about how much he misses her cat face? Not censoring, that is literally what he used in the text. Or what about the sex ed / first year volleyball coach / PE teacher that had sex with and sent nudes to a student I graduated with while we were still in school? Or the teacher that groomed a student for several years and possibly groomed others or at least attempted to? Or the teacher that was extremely racist and sexist and made comments about being married to some of his female students, or how every time the Hispanic kids were late to class he made jokes about how they were late because they were hiding from ICE? 62. In middle school, there was a teacher who started during my 6th or 7th grade, or my 1st or 2nd year of middle school depending on how you want to count numbers. Regardless. This teacher was new, and by the time I left 8th grade it was well known among the students that he was a creep. At least that is what the rumors were. I did not have this teacher, but I heard that he had the prettiest girls in the front of the classroom, and the boys and the uglier girls farther in the back and farther away from his desk. I never really thought anything of those rumors. I never had a teacher, and why would a teacher do such a thing? Well, years and years later, well after I graduated high school, it turns out this teacher was indeed a creep. And he had been having sexual relations with students since basically the beginning. He was caught, arrested, and tossed in jail. This is one of those things where I wish I'd said something to my parents. But since I didn't really believe the rumors, why would they believe me? And even if they told school, why would the school believe them? So yes, not a remarkable story, but there it is. 63. I was in 8th grade and had this total creep of a tech teacher. One day during a lecture on bridges he went silent and completely zoned out while staring at this one girl in our class. It was so awkward because she and everyone in the class was painfully aware of his gaze. She literally pulled up her shirt and covered her chest, to which he stuttered and continued about bridges. That same year I was at a party at my best friend's house. Turns out his mom was a friend of a friend with that teacher, and he was there and plastered. He pulled me over into his convo and asked, "Aren't I the best teacher? I paired you up with that really pretty girl, didn't I?" I was uncomfortable and just agreed. Later on, I saw him wandering about the property just looking around. My friend and I literally hid from him to avoid him finding us. Also had a science teacher that would jokingly threaten to beat me and my best friend with a hammer he kept in his desk. That teacher was the best. Anytime we would act up he would just open his desk drawer and hold up the hammer a little and we would chuckle and quiet down.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.